Hello again. You'll now have done your round of mini grannies, just following the instructions from before, and got them attached and done your 2 rounds of granny stripes. And now it's time to work on the final border of granny squares, and I'm sure this is a part that you've been looking forward to. These are the granny squares that are interspersed. These are, well, they're 1, 2, 3, 4 coloured granny squares interspersed with plain granny squares where we've got the embroidery, and it's this that we're going to be working on today. I'm assuming that you've already made up the squares, the coloured granny squares, and I've got them all laid out ready to join later. If you haven't, just be aware that these squares are slightly bigger than the ones in the earlier part of the blanket. They've got an extra round in them. So although they're the same number of colours, 1, 2, 3, 4, rounds 3 and 4 are the same colour. So that makes a slightly bigger square, but that's just because it had to be that size to fit into the count of the stitch count of the previous round. Okay, so we can put that aside, and today I'm going to show you, first of all, I'll just do a quick run through on how to do the plain granny square, because it's just a couple of little bits that are slightly different from the coloured one, and then we'll crack on with the embroidery. So I can put this away for the moment. And as you probably saw in the blanket, there are 2 different colourways in the embroidered squares. There's the dark grey, or the grey square with the pale green embroidery, and the parchment square with the khaki coloured embroidery, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So this is the square ready, and you can follow the instructions on the pattern for how to make it. It's like the multicoloured granny squares of this round. It's got 5 rounds to this square, but just worked in the one colour. So follow the pattern, and then we can continue. You have got your square ready now, and the centre has been pulled nice and tight and finished off, and the outside, the end on the outside has been sewn in as well. So this is like your blank canvas ready to do your embroidery. But first we've got some preparation. I mentioned earlier on, I think, that I've got some, if you've not done any embroidery before, don't worry. I've got some tips and not shortcuts as such, but suggestions to make it as simple as possible for you. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So I'm going to put this to one side, and I'm going to bring out my A4 notepad. This is where I write all my patterns. This was balanced on my knee when I was making the blanket, and this is why I've used this. This is going to be, it sounds silly, but it's my template for measuring out the yarn. It's A4, which is pretty much the same as a 12-inch ruler, just slightly short, as you can see. So you can use, if you've got a piece of A4 paper. In the US, I know that you don't use these sizings for paper. I think your typical printer paper is slightly shorter. If you've got a 12-inch ruler, that's fine. And it's not absolutely, you don't have to be absolutely accurate with this. What we're going to be doing is using this as a template for measuring out lengths of yarn, and it's only a guide, but I've worked out that measuring it with this will give me enough yarn to do half of one square, and then measure it out again and do another half. And what I did was, once I knew exactly how much I wanted to measure, I did do a little preparation and made a pile of little lengths of yarn all measured out. You'll see this in the photo coming up. Yep, so these have all been measured and are ready just to pick up each time I'm going to do, there'll be 2 of those lengths for each square. Okay, so I'm going to put this back, but you can use a ruler or you can measure out a piece of cardboard. This, as I say, is roughly about 11.5 inches, this piece of paper. That's kind of very roughly what you can use as your template. And I've got the yarn that I'm going to be embroidering with. It's the khaki colour. And I'm just going to wind off quite a lot of this so that I'm not pulling the ball the whole time. Right, now what I'm going to do is just lay this down on the piece of paper. I'm not going to wrap it round. I know sometimes you can measure lengths of yarn by wrapping them round something, but I don't want to do that because as soon as you stretch, it makes it shorter. So I'm just laying it down. I'm just letting it fall, right? So that's, I'm counting that as number 1. And then I'm just going right up to the end there. Then I'm going to grab that end there and put it down at the bottom and measure out another length. Grab that, that's 2 lengths and 3 lengths. Now you can see just how loose this is. I'm not pulling it tight at all. 3 lengths, 4 lengths, 5 lengths, and then I'm going to add about half the length, very roughly, extra. So we've got 5.5 lengths of my notepad, and then I'm going to cut that. Right, so this is the length of yarn, which looks really long. It totally goes against the grain as an embroiderer, because when I was taught to embroider, I was always taught to work with a shorter length as possible, because it was easier to work with and it kept the thread or the yarn from wearing. But in this case, I'm using a really nice long piece because I don't want to have too many ends to have to sew in on the back. I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to bring my square back in. And I've also got the needle that I'm going to use, and it needs to be a needle with a nice big eye. So because we're going to be putting 2 lengths of yarn through the eye of this needle, and so you need to have a nice big tapestry needle with a big eye. They come in all different sizes, but this is DMC size 18, which is perfect for this job. In fact, the eye of this is actually just a little bit bigger than the one I'm working with, so it will be easier to thread. So it's number 18. I bought this packet for £2 or £3 on Amazon, but you can also buy quite cheap. These are, I can't remember how much they were, but this was a packet of tapestry needles or wool needles that I bought on Amazon a while ago. I've hardly used them, to be fair, because they are cheaper, but you do get some. You want quite a short needle, you don't want a long needle, but you do get some with really big eyes, and I think that would probably work, but I haven't used that one. I'll just use the one that I use to actually do my embroidery. So the first thing we're going to do is to thread a little bit of that onto the needle. And the way I thread my needle, I have to assume that you've maybe never done any embroidery before, so I'm just going to show you the way I do it. I bend my yarn over the needle, pull it really tight so my fingers are pressing really hard, so that's flattened that loop, and then just push the needle down over the top of it and pull it through. And now we've got this very long length of wool, but we're going to be using it double. So my first the first thing that I'm going to do in this square is to look for the very corner here, and the stitches on either side of the corner space, I'm just going to put my needle through there, through these stitches, and I'm going to pull it through, and then I'm going to take the needle off. And this is me got my yarn anchored without having to sew it in at the back, because there's, you know, it's been put through as a loop. And my next job is to find the two ends and get them even. So I just put the two ends together and then just run my hand up the length of yarn until I get to near to where the yarn goes through the crochet, and just pull it. So that's the two lengths now are even, and we've got the two ends together. Now these two ends are going to go into the needle at the same time. So we're going to do the same as I did before. I'm going to bend it over and press really tightly like that, so you can just see the wool between my fingers, and you can see my fingers are actually white with the pressure because I'm pushing it really tight, and then I'm just going to firmly push the needle down on the top like that and pull through. I'm not going to pull a great big long end through. I'm just going to leave it with a fairly short end through my needle, and then we're ready to start. Now what we're going to do is work down to the middle and then out to this side, and we should manage to do it all with this length of yarn, and then we'll measure out the next length of yarn and go the diagonally opposite way. So there are a couple of things that you want to think about. One of them is that you want to have as little yarn on the back, or at least the exact amount of same amount of yarn on the back as you do on the front. So you have to be aware of what's happening on the back so that you don't end up maybe putting your needle in about this. We're working into the large holes of the granny square. You don't put your needle in there and then maybe bring it out here and have a big long tail along the back, because any long tails like that will just become quite wobbly and not very secure when you've finally got a finished blanket. Right, so I've got my yarn attached, and I'm going into this hole, which is immediately down from where we started. And my next tip is to work between these two lengths of yarn. So if you do that and pull it through like so, it keeps your yarn from twisting. Now I'm going to show you this. I'm going to work the whole thing so you'll see what happens. So I've made my first double stitch there, and then I'm going to come across to this space here and come through. Now by doing that, we've just got a short end on the back, or a short stitch on the back. And like I did with this one, I'm going to split these two and I'm going to go in, we're making a kind of V shape. So I'm going into this next space, but I'm going in between the two lengths of yarn, and that helps to stop them from twisting with each other, and they lie nice and flat. And I've got 3 stitches that I want to put into this same space. So I'm going to come through where we had done our first stitch and pull through, and again split the two lengths and put the needle in. So we've got 3 stitches going into that one space, like so. And then I'm coming up to this one to finish the V, this V shape, and splitting and into the same space. So there we've started. Now your stitches will, because of the fact that we're working in 2 large spaces in the granny square, your stitches won't always be exactly the same size, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not a problem because it looks natural. So there we have the first bit. Now the next thing to do is to repeat, but 1 down. So we'd gone through this space here, but I'm going to come down 1. Again, it's just a short stitch on the back because we're just traveling from that center one across, and I'm going to split the 2 lengths and go into the next space, if you like. If you think about it as a branch coming diagonally down, this is maybe slightly, not really tricky, but because the spaces are quite big. But when you come through here with your needle, just be careful you don't pull one of these stitches loose as you come through. And I'm going to go into the middle again. And then out to this one and into the middle. So you can see how, you know, there's a tendency for this to start twisting. So it doesn't look so nice if it's twisted, and that's why I'm splitting it to keep it flat. Now I'm sure you know that this will be the next place where we'll go, and down to this one. So we're 1 away from the center now, and then come through here and into that same space, and through here again. Sorry, and just keep your tension on these stitches because they're quite big stitches. I think it's a good idea to keep a reasonably tight tension on them, because otherwise they might want to spring loose and become quite loose. So there's the first part. Now I've got to work into this center one, so I'm going across here now and into that center hole, and then from the middle and into the center hole, and then this is the first half of this diagonal line done because we're into the center. There you go. Now what I'm going to do now is turn it round, because we're going to work back up to this point. So bear in mind where you are. You're in the center hole, so we can come up to this. We're going to do a mirror image of this. So what we're going to do are V shapes that go in this direction up to this point. So I'm going to go up to the next space and come back down into that center hole. So there's actually going to end up with 6 different groups of stitches in that center hole. Into the middle one and back into the center, and then out to the right and into the center. That one has twisted, you can see. pull that. That's better. So that's the first part of this section. Now, I'm going to come through this one this time and come up here, because I don't want to go from, see, yeah, sorry, I'm just needing to clarify this. We have finished this last stitch down here in the middle hole. So if I was to then do what we normally do and come through this one, I'll do it and let you see it. You can see that it's a much longer stitch. We don't want that on the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the opposite way coming up. I'm going to come through this hole here, which is closest to the center, and make the center stitch going the opposite direction. It's going up the way. So that's just to try and keep the stitches small on the back. And then it's gone into this space here, so it's just a short hop over to here, and I can come back down into that space and then out to this side and back down. And then I'll do the same. I'm going into this middle space and going straight up. And then out and down, out to the right and down. You can see that my length of wool is getting shorter. I'm going up in the middle here and going up the way into the next space up, and then out to the left and out to the right. And then finally, I've got just enough of my yarn left to go into this space and go up, just that little hop up to the top. And there we have the first half of the embroidery done. We've got this end to stitch in, and I prefer in this case to separate the two and stitch them in separately. I just think it holds it a little bit more securely in the back. So I'm just going to run it through both the green wool and a little bit of the crochet so that it's catching something. Just, you see what I've done? I've just kind of worked it through. I'm going to make sure that gets worked in, just as you would normally do finishing off a colour in your crochet squares. And then I'll do that with this one. You can try the shortcut of doing them both at the same time, but I think there's more of a tendency for that to pull out. So I'm going to come through. I'm not going through, I'm being careful that I'm not coming through the front of my crochet. So I'm picking up a few stitches, and if possible, you see what I've done here? I've just split that green thread, and that will just hold it a little bit more firmly. I know that I try to be as secure as possible. Probably twice would be enough to run up and down, but I just done it 3 times to be absolutely sure. Right, so there is the front and there is the back, and there is a little bit difference in the back. We don't have quite the same direction of stitches, but it still looks pretty similar to the front. So I'm going to stop and measure out another length, and I'll just do that again for you, and then we'll do the little French knot berry in the middle, and that will be how to make the embroidery. And once you get in a swing of it, what I did was I made up all my parchment squares and all my grey squares. I had my lengths of wool all cut, so it was just a case of working through the squares. And once you get into the rhythm of it and your tension and everything, it's quite quick to do. It works up quite quickly. I was quite surprised how fast it worked up. So I'll pop back when I've got my next length. I've got my green yarn on my needle, and I've put it through like I did when we started this one, put it through the 2 stitches, and we're ready to go. So I'm going to work this one a little bit quicker just to remind you of what we did, but there is one little bit on this second side that's slightly different. So I'm going to go in, don't worry if this V shape here, like we did there, looks different from the end because we just put the 2 ends into that one space. It does look slightly different. That is still part of the natural aspect of a branch, so don't worry about that. So I have done my first stitch, and then I'm going to come in and work down, come through the middle and work down. So we're doing 3 stitches in a V shape with a straight one in the middle. Splitting that length, these 2 lengths with the needle before going in. That just caught one of the fibres, but it's okay. Keeping your tension just fractionally on the tight side to stop it's just to stop these long stitches from bouncing back. Into this one. And down. To this one and down. Now, what I'm not going to do this time is work through here because we've already got a stitch, so we don't want to end up with it too bulky. So we don't need to make the V shapes that go into the center. We've just got to join this to the center. Now if I come through this hole here, which I've just gone into with my last stitch, I'll pull that last stitch out. So I have to go the opposite way. So I need to come down and find that middle and come through there. And that actually, the middle hole being tighter than the other spaces helps to hold everything quite firmly. And then into the, so we're going the opposite way. See, and I've done that. And then I'm going to swing it round. And again, I'm going to come out. I can come through the middle hole because I've gone in here. So I'm going to come through that middle hole and go up like we did when we were doing the second side before, and go into the next space up. And then we can continue with this V shape. Just remember all the time that you want to keep your length on the back no longer than the length on the front, so you don't want to carry your yarn along the back too much, which is why I'm trying to keep my stitches working it's a different direction as we go up. Remember, we did the upright bit first and into the space above. There will be a chart, a diagram on the pattern, which I haven't written yet, but I will include that, which will remind you of the direction to go. And then up to the next space. Nearly finished. And then we've just got the last one up into that final space at the top, and that's the green finished. So again, I'm going to take this down into separate lengths. And just finish it off. Splitting where possible the khaki yarn and going through a little bit of the crochet. This is the last bit, and then we've got the berry to do next. Now, you might, if you're not an embroiderer, as I am, you might think this is an awful lot of extra work. You've got your square, why should you then add extra embroidery onto it? But I really think it's the focal point of this blanket and well worth the effort. I think I forgot to mention when I was starting this that the outer round of the granny square is on its wrong side. That's the way they all have been when I've been attaching them to the blanket. So that's the way the front of the embroidery is lying. Now I've got to pick up my next colour, which is the claret. And I'm going to take a length. Now it doesn't need to be anything like as long. It's just, we're just going to put a berry in the middle with a French knot. So I'm just going to take a length that's just about that. You will not need anything like that amount, but it's nice to have a working length. And I'm going to do what we did before, just to avoid having too many ends to sew in. So I'm going to pick up that green stem, or one of them, it doesn't matter which one of the four sides. I'm just going to put my needle underneath that green stem. I've actually also gone very slightly underneath the crochet as well, so I'm not going to loosen that green stem. And I'm going to take my needle out and match up my two ends and thread them onto my needle like so, and we're ready to do our French knot. So I've got my two ends. I'm going to grab them with my left hand and I'm going to lay the needle on top and I'm going to wrap it twice around the needle, and then without leaving go with my left hand, I'm going to bend round and put the needle in just at that center hole again. There's been a lot of yarn going in and out of that centre hole, but even although it's been pulled quite tightly, it's still possible to get the needle into it. So you've got this loop, 2 loops that have gone round your needle, and they don't have to be pulled. You can see that they're quite loose. They don't have to be pulled tight. The looser they are, the bigger your knot will be. And I'm now going to pull my needle right through to the back. I've put it into the centre hole, and I'm going to pull it all the way through to back and carry all that end through with me. And there's the French knot on the surface. And my yarn's through at the back now, and again, I'm going to separate it. I just always think it's much easier and more secure. We're just needing to finish off now by making some extra stitches on the back. And what I do is I make a stitch through my green and then just catch it around that length of yarn and do that a few times. And what's actually happening is that you're getting a little bit of a berry on the back. So I've brought my needle through, it's got the length of yarn underneath, and it's just making a little bump. I'll do another one. That's 3 I've done with this length, and I'll do 3 with the other one. It's not essential to do that. I just felt that if I put another kind of berry looking bump on the back, then if the blanket is on its reverse side, it will look quite similar. That's me. I'm just going to pull that tight. I'll do that again with the other length. You don't have to do this. If you don't want to, you can just run them through and finish them off as we did with the green yarn. But so I'm just going to pick up a little stitch quite close to where the red already is, and just make sure that that is underneath the needle. You can see. And I'm going to do that again, just in the same place basically, and underneath the needle. I think I'll just leave that one with 2, and then I'm going to put my needle in and pull it through. It's a bit wonky, but it still looks a little bit like a berry. So there we go. That's your embroidered square. So you've got those to do with the parchment, and then the other ones to do with the grey. And then you can join them in the normal way with the continuous join as you go. And that's that round complete. We're almost finished. There's just the last few stripes of the front post, and then the 2 rounds of treble stitch and the final round of double crochet, and that's the blanket finished. I'll pop back just to explain that final edging, and see you in a minute.